Well, howdy. It's Michael Osinski.
Hey there, partner. It's Tyler Esselman.
And you are listening to This One Goes to 11.
This One Goes to 11. It's our podcast where we invite someone on each week to make their case for what they believe is a perfect album.
So perfect that 10 out of 10 just isn't good enough.
No.
I don't know what we're doing. Okay, let's stop this. All right. Hey, Tyler.
Yes, sir.
Do you remember when you first became aware of the Beatles?
No, not even close. No way.
Okay.
Yeah, do you?
Yeah, I do. Okay, this is not going to surprise you or anyone who regularly listens to the podcast. It comes from Sesame Street. Because they had a band in I guess you call them a sketch. Is it called a segment on Sesame Street? And they had a band called the Beatles. And they were all
actual
insects.
Beatles.
Yeah, actual insect Beatles. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, the song that they sang was called Letter B.
Letter B.
So it's a song for B. And I think that I'd probably heard Beatles songs before them, but that was my first conscious awareness of them as a significant band that got spoofed on Sesame Street, essentially.
That's so good. If I reach back far enough, I think my memories of the Beatles actually start with my sister, because she got really into the Beatles in early high school. Posters on her wall, T-shirts, the whole thing. Was really knew their music really well. And I actually think that she probably led to my appreciation of them growing. And then, used to start to see him in media in different places. I remember Paul and Linda on The Simpsons. I remember when that happened.
Okay.
And that's the episode that Lisa goes vegetarian. That was the caveat for them appearing on the show, is that they required that one character be made canonically a vegetarian for the life of the show.
Okay.
Goes way back.
Yeah. Also thinking about it too, I think my dad also owned, there were those double CDs, the blue one and the red one, which were basically just it was their greatest hits essentially. And so that was that, that would play often too. So yeah, I guess they've always been there for those of us who were born after the 60s. They've always been there. And amazingly, dear listeners, they still have not entered the Pantheon, and they're not going to enter the Pantheon today either. Why is that? Because we have a guest talking about something else. Who are we talking to, Tyler?
We're talking to Myra Juenger. Myra Juenger is my roommate. We live in the same apartment. We have the same mailing address. She hails from Southern Illinois, not just across the river from where I grew up, actually. So we have many common interests and common bits of history. She has worked in many different realms, but most prominently in the film and television industry in a variety of behind-the-camera sort of capacities, set decoration, prop styling, that sort of thing. She's really into film. She loves film. She loves music. She loves being outdoors, and she also is one heck of a cross-stitcher. I'm telling you, if she's cool with it, we're going to share some of that work as part of the promotion for this episode, because it is really quite impressive.
Is she going to stitch the bless this mess thing that you've referenced a few times?
I hope so. I think if you cross stitch, you have to, right? You're required to at this point. And she brought a banger of an album, didn't she?
Sure did. Let's just get to the conversation.
Yeah, you know what? Let's just do it. Okay.
Yeah. All right, here we go.
Then, without any further ado, Myra Juenger, welcome to This One Goes to 11.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Dear listeners, today we have a second iteration of this interesting little formation that we get into sometimes. You might be familiar with the fact that Michael and I record this pod from afar, from a distance.
Quite a distance.
Yeah, quite a distance. And every now and then, though, one of us can be in the same city as a person that we're talking to. And in fact, today, I am speaking to someone that I live in the same apartment with. And Myra's my roommate. So we're sitting here in our living room, just about to talk about a really incredible album. Is this your first time on a podcast, or have you been?
Yeah, this is my first time on a podcast. So
look at
very
that.
exciting.
All right.
I listen to podcasts a lot.
She does.
Yeah. I'm always have my headphones in, and Tyler's like, Myra. I'm
not like that all the time. It's just when she's about to, I don't want her to touch the stove if she's engrossed in a podcast. I don't want her to burn herself. It's routinely the thing. But anyway, we're very excited to have you, and it's great to be able to do it in person, even if it's halfway. But we have very serious business ahead of us. Myra, tell us, what album hath thou brought for consideration for inclusion in the pantheon of This One Goes to 11?
Well, I have brought the only album by Paul and Linda McCartney, Ram. So yeah, the only album that they did together.
Yes. His second solo, quote unquote, album, right?
Yeah, and not her only album.
Mm-hmm.
She had her family released a posthumous album that she had written while she was still alive, and it's pretty good.
Yeah,
I mean it's very raw, but I think it's a nice listen to for someone, who just kind of wanted to play around and write down her thoughts and put it to music.
Oh, okay. We're already getting into Linda. That's exciting.
All right.
I'm going to talk about Linda a lot.
Okay, good. I actually think that's just.
That's probably fine. I think we know quite a bit about that other guy. So
yeah. Michael, were you terribly familiar with this album before Myra brought it?
No, though when I listened to it, I realized that I definitely knew one song off this album, and I hadn't. I mean, maybe we'll talk about this a little bit later. I feel like whenever I hear Paul McCartney sing, and it doesn't have like modern production values on it, I just sort of assume that it's a Beatles song I didn't know. So because I think there's just something unmistakable about the sound of his voice, I just immediately go to, oh, it's a Beatles song that I just, it's like a B-side or something. But that's not the case. So
that's not what I think about John Lennon, though, incidentally. Like, I think when I hear John Lennon's voice, I'm always like, this is probably some weird solo thing he did during his Yoko years,
What are you saying about Yoko, Tyler?
Hey, I'm pro Yoko. Are you pro Yoko, Myra?
I'm pro Yoko. We were talking earlier today. I have an unpopular opinion that John is my least favorite Beatle.
Oh no, I'm okay with that.
I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that too.
He just, I don't know. I don't think his music hits me the way it hits other people. Yeah. I'm not saying it's bad, but I just like, some people are like, this is the greatest album of all time. I'm like,
sure.
And I think Imagine's been played to death.
It
kind
has.
of like Don't Stop Believin', where I'll hear it on the, like, if I ever hear it, I'm like, ugh, this song again.
It's almost like taking cough medicine to listen to Don't Stop Believin' now. It has been for a while.
Yeah. Oh,
well, okay, you invoked that other band, and so I suppose it's time. It's time for us to share this week's edition of everyone's favorite segment, which is an opportunity for us to bring the listeners up to speed on the artist that we're speaking about. Which, again, we say this every time, but if you don't know who this guy is, who are you? Nonetheless, it's everyone's favorite segment. What is it, Michael?
It is the beginner's guide to Paul and Linda McCartney's Ram in 60 seconds.
And Michael's doing it this week, which is it's good. His powers are greater than mine in this realm, wouldn't you say?
I don't know about that. I feel like I figured out the exact number of lines in a Google Doc to get it down to make it come in at 60 seconds, and I just I'm firm in my adherence to that number.
He kills his darlings. So, but as you might remember, Myra, being a listener of the show, this is your chance to grade Michael on how he does summarizing this artist and this album into 60 seconds in whatever terms you see fit. Get as creative as you'd like. I'm sure Paul would be gratified by that. But Michael, are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right, 60 seconds on the clock. We're beginning in 3, 2, 1, go.
Sir Paul McCartney, maybe you've heard of him, was born in Liverpool, England in 1942. He spent most of the late 50s and all of the 60s with John Lennon and two other Liverpudlians playing bass guitar, being a heartthrob, defining a British rock sound, and churning out one revolutionary album after another before it all started to go awry for various reasons. During this time, he met and married photographer Linda Eastman, who would later become his musical collaborator after that other band broke up. In 1971, the two co-wrote and released the album Ram, Paul's second quote-unquote solo work and his first to top the UK albums chart. It was widely panned. It was also criticized by his former band members who felt like the song's Too Many People and Three Legs featured intentional digs at them. McCartney later admitted that was partially the case. Yet, the ambitious single, Uncle Albert, Admiral Halsey, did give Paul his first quote-unquote solo #1 single in the US. With time, critics grew to appreciate the album, and the duo formed the band Wings. Paul has continued to make music, joining the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame twice, once with the other band, but sadly Linda succumbed to breast cancer in 1998.
Pretty darn good there, buddy.
All right.
Good.
Pretty good.
I didn't say the B word either.
You didn't say the B word. All right. Myra, it's to you. The floor is yours. How did Michael do?
I'm going to go pretty simple with a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being best. And I'm going to say, I am going to say 8.5.
Woo, okay.
I'll take that.
85.
Docking a couple points because a lot of Paul, not a lot of Linda. So I'm, as you will come to see, I'm going to be a big Linda defender during this.
Good. Again, we love it.
Yeah. But yeah, I think that was pretty concise, especially since, Paul has had, I think outside of the Beatles, I think I remember hearing he's released 50 other albums.
Insane. And
he's just, got a whole discography and legacy behind him that's just so massive. So massive. So I think that was pretty good. Pretty nice, simple.
Good way to start.
Just a little more Linda.
I understand that. And also I sort of feel like, some things I was reading about the album is that once they form Wings, I feel like she becomes a much more prominent member of the band. I mean, when you listen to it, it feels like it sounds like she's just doing backing vocals, but I know that she played keyboards on it and co-wrote almost all of the songs on the album with him. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think so. She's at least, credited towards all of them. And even, I say what you will about Paul and his ego. I don't know if he would have, even though she's his wife, I don't know. He's usually one to be like, if you didn't write it, your name's not on the credits.
He's notorious for that, isn't he?
Yeah.
I mean, I will say also too, after watching that documentary, my opinion of both Paul and John has decreased significantly because of the way they treated my favorite Beatle in the whole world, who was George Harrison, and they treated him like absolute shit.
He's my favorite. Are you talking about Get Back?
Yes.
That's a part of my origin for this album.
Oh, good.
So we'll talk about Get Back again.
Yeah. Well, let's not get close. Let's not get into that yet, because the first thing we like to do is we like to start with just asking you a question so that the listeners can get to know who you are, so we can better understand who you are. And so that question is, what is your relationship with music, both in the past and in the present?
I classify myself as a pretty old soul when it comes to music, because majority of what I listen to is what, my parents listened to in the late 60s and the 70s. From my mom, I get a lot of John Denver, Simon and Garfunkel, James Taylor, the Beatles. From my dad, I get Cat Stevens, CCR, Bob Seger, Gordon Lightfoot, the Eagles. And like that, era and those like genres are what I listen to even till today. Like, I don't know a lot of new artists at all. I don't want to say how long it was that I thought Cardi B was a comedian, and then I learned that she was actually a rapper.
She definitely has a humorous bent to her, though, I would say. I not saying that like, I don't listen to any modern music. Modern music sucks.
It doesn't. I just keep going back to the classic rock that my parents listened to. And when I was growing into my own music, when I was like in my tweens and like early teens, that was a lot of like the bands that were, Backstreet Boys was my first concert.
Oh yeah. Nice.
And then I started doing like Fall Out Boy, Panic at the Disco, pop punk, emo kind of stuff. Also really getting into movie soundtracks.
Yes.
I had like my whole CD binder was just like film scores.
That's okay. You get 500,000 points for that. That's a great entryway into like appreciating instrumental music too, just on a kind of larger level. Like listen to them. Listen to movie soundtracks just for fun.
Yeah, even like the big blockbuster popcorn. One I wore out was and I put it on one of my 4 is the first Pirates of the Caribbean soundtrack, which.
The Curse of the Black Pearl. Kind of a banger.
It's so good.
Hans Zimmer?
Actually it's not Hans Zimmer. He produced it.
Okay.
But I'm gonna mess up his name. Klaus. Oh,
Oh,
I can't remember his last name.
Badelt? Is that what it is?
I think so.
Sounds
but
like a German.
Hans Zimmer did the sequels, and he also produced the first one, but he wasn't the composer for the first one. But yeah, and then that's still the majority of what I listen to. I still have, you know, my road trip playlist, which is all like, again, 60s, 70s rock, and that's just kind of my bread and butter, and I'll never really get tired of it. So
do you find yourself like discovering new albums by those artists? Like, is that a way that you like, so is it that you're listening to the same albums by those artists, or is it that you're deepening your knowledge of their body of work over time?
Well, I'm not really an album listener.
Yes, that's right. This is right.
I don't go through and listen to like albums from beginning to end all the way through. I'm kind of like, I like these 3 songs, so it's going on my playlist.
Sure.
Kind of thing. Like all my playlists on Spotify that I've made are their own. They're either by genre or kind of by mood and vibe. And, you know, that kind of thing. So like, you know, I've got my road trip playlist. I've got like my Halloween fall playlist. I've got my need to relax and cry playlist. So I don't listen to a whole lot of albums all the way through. And sometimes, you know, I'll just, by coincidence, I'll be somewhere and I'll hear a song and I was like, oh, that's a song I haven't heard before. And it's already it's a Cat Stevens song. And I like didn't like, maybe I heard it when I was younger and I just like, it's not on my Spotify playlist right now. I'm like, oh, I'm gonna go put that on there and like listen to it several times in a row because I didn't remember he had written that song, and it comes to me. So sometimes you like, you know, you rediscover older artists.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You know what? Fun fact I learned recently about Spotify is that when you create a playlist and you add an artist's music to that playlist, the artist can see the name of the playlist that you've added that music to.
Yes.
So if you come up with some sort of like crazy kooky name that, I mean, granted, you know, some like huge bands, it's probably someone managing the band who's seeing that. But like indie artists, if you put their music on a playlist, I don't know if they know who you are, but they know what the name of the playlist is that you put their song on. So
that's actually great. I kind of love that.
Everyone's sex playlist is out there.
Yeah.
That's the
and that's my playlists are definitely like Fall Out Boy titled songs. Like my random one that's just like my miscellaneous stuff is Feast Your Ear Tongues on These Memory Pops. Is
that a Fall Out Boy line?
No, that's a Community line.
Oh, is it?
Oh shit! Community.
That's so good. You talked about that the Beatles were part of that rotation with your parents. Do you remember your first introduction? I hesitate to enter this conversation that way. I think maybe I think it also is worth saying, and I mentioned this to Myra earlier today, as we were standing in our kitchen because we live in the same apartment together, that this is not only our first Paul McCartney appearance on the pod, it's our first Beatle on the pod, period.
This is true.
And it's only been recently that anyone has actually nominated any Beatles albums, I think. I almost kind of want to try to separate the conversation from that and just say, like, what do you remember about your discovery of Ram in particular?
I do remember it started with watching Get Back.
Okay.
When it first came out, and I really loved it. I loved that you kind of got to be the fly on the wall. I thought what Peter Jackson did with restoring the audio and just being able to restore the film was amazing. And I have watched it several times since then, just kind of as background noise.
It's great for that.
Yeah, just to kind of feel like, oh, you know, the boys are over there doing their thing. I kind of got obsessed with it for a little bit, and I was like, you know, I really don't know a lot about Paul's solo, like post-Beatles work. I mean, you know, you kind of do.
You know a few.
You know a few. You
Maybe
know
I'm Amazed, Band on the Run kind of thing.
His Bond song, which I just thought was a Paul song, I didn't know was a Wing song.
Oh, which movie is that from?
Live and Let Die.
Oh, that's right. That is.
What am I doing?
Yeah.
It had to be that one, didn't it?
And of course, and let's not forget their Christmas song too.
Yeah, I actually like that song.
That's.
Simply
Yes.
A wonderful Christmas time.
Those synths, I think, are one of the biggest musical harbingers of the holiday season. Those absolutely.
Oh yeah,
it gets me right there when the.
I think people are like, it's the worst Christmas song, and I'm like, there are definitely worse Christmas songs. I gotta tell you,
there's such worse ones. Okay, let's get back to Get Back. Yeah.
So yeah, I post watching Get Back for the first time, I kind of went down a little bit of a rabbit hole of Paul. And then obviously like Linda as well. And I was like, I don't really know anything about Linda at all. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, I actually found this Australian YouTuber, Elliot Roberts,
shout out Elliot,
who talks about the Beatles and just music and film, but he's kind of concentrated on the Beatles. Mm-hmm. And he did a video essay talking about Ram as his argument that it's the first indie pop album.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, that's a really good argument. And I all of his takes on it, I was like, I have never even heard of this album. Mm-hmm. And so I kind of discovered it through that, and I listened to it, and then I started listening to all of his other albums, and I started listening to Wings, and I read a biography about Linda. And so, yeah, I kind of just, each domino kind of tipped itself over. And I started, it's like that meme where the really small domino and the really big domino.
Right.
Yeah, it kind of all started with just watching Get Out and being really enthralled with it and being like, I gotta get to know this Paul McCartney guy better. And yeah.
You said Get Out there.
I want to clarify. Get Back, not Get Out.
I actually think that would be that's a great sketch idea. Is somebody there's Get Back and there's Get Out playing in theaters right next to each other, and people walk into the wrong one.
Get Back.
But wait, so that means like that came out relatively recently, right? So does that mean your discovery of this album is recent too?
Yeah, this is pretty recent. This is only in the last couple of years.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Did you talk to your parents about it when you discovered it? Were they familiar with it?
They weren't. I don't think.
Interesting.
My mom's records, who I kind of commandeered, and she had like a couple of Beatles and then John Lennon stuff, George Harrison, because George Harrison is her favorite.
Yeah. And
she's like, I just never. She never got into Wings or got into the Paul McCartney stuff. So it wasn't on their radar either.
There was something about Paul that always seemed a little bit dead eyes to me.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I think the opposite.
Really?
I've always felt like a really nice warmth
really?
From him.
Well, there was inherent cynicism to John that was hard for me to connect with as a younger person, I felt.
Yeah, I think that's a big thing about me and John too, is I'm just like, he's just such a like downer, really. I'm like,
and yet I feel like John's, I mean, I know it's kind of hard to separate like on the Beatles songs, like who was the primary writer of them. Was it John or was it Paul? But I do feel like the John songs always had a little more, I don't want to say depth because that feels like I'm insulting Paul, and that's not the case. But I do feel like I felt like John's songs would wrestle with like, I don't know, more difficult subjects, or he was more willing to kind of expose himself in some ways. Whereas like Paul, and I will say something like a lot of the songs on this album also sort of carry that forward. Paul just feels like he's kind of telling stories for the most part. Like, and they are like fictional, about fictional characters. Like, I feel like 9 times out of 10, if a Beatles song had someone's name in the title, it was probably a Paul McCartney song.
We could do some. You should do some data. We should pull some data on that one.
Just do some digging. Well, all this talk about music, it's time for some listening. So, Myra, which song have you chosen as the standout track from this album?
Well, it was really hard because I've got quite a few tracks on here that I really do like listening to over and over again. But I did choose "Dear Boy." It's just kind of light and airy, and it really puts a smile on my face. So.
Hey, we need more of that.
Yeah,
I would say.
Tell me about it.
So before you say more, let's give our listeners a chance to listen to it. If you are listening to us on Spotify, Spotify or YouTube, you're about to hear the whole song. And if you're with us on Apple Podcasts, bless you, welcome. You are just going to hear a little snippet. But either way, we'll see you in just a moment.